Hi, awesome members of the Nest. Thank you for joining us. You could be anywhere, but you chose to be here with us. And tonight we're talking to Katherine Sherbrooke, who is the author of The Hidden Life of Aster Kelly. How's it going?
Wonderful. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, thank you for joining us. So excited to talk about this book.
Me too.
For those of us who aren't familiar with you and your work, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So, The Hidden Life of Aster Kelly is my third novel. And before that, I also wrote a family memoir. So this is my fourth book in total. This is my second career. I was in business before starting to write. And once I started, couldn't stop. So I've gone full steam ahead with it.
Love it. You shouldn't stop.
Thank you.
I already told you our first question. So you have an adorable dog writing partner. Can you tell us more about him?
I do. So my adorable dog is named Huckleberry. He's a black lab. He is now 12 years old. So he's a verified senior with, gray everywhere. But he has been with me for all of my books. So sits at my feet as I write. And as we all know who have fur babies, right? The biggest champions around, because he loves everything I do and and never offers me, never says, "Oh, that's not going to work, Mom." So I rely on him a lot. And then when I'm feeling really, when I lose my confidence and I just need to like get on the floor and curl into a ball, he's there for that always. So I rely on him a lot.
So sweet. Yeah, you were telling us that he can't really make it down there anymore. Otherwise, he'd be joining us.
Can't do the stairs anymore, which is so sad. So yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, on to happier topics.
Yeah. It's okay. He still wags his tail a lot. And actually right upstairs more than I used to, because like I just want him at my feet, right? So yeah. He's still living a very happy life, just as long as there are not a lot of stairs involved. So yeah.
Get it. I also don't love stairs.
Yeah, see, we can all relate, right? It's like hard on the knees and everything. So
Megan, do you want to go with number 2?
Yeah, so your book tour looks amazing so far. What was your favorite part of your visit to Hollywood?
Yes, so you guys have been tracking my visit to Hollywood. There was so much that was fun, but I have to say, I totally geeked out doing the Sony Studios tour. And a lot of people don't, including me, don't think of Sony Studios as like, being in the old time movies, but the studio is on the same property that has been changed over hands many times. So it was site of like where Charlie Chaplin started, and then MGM owned it, and then Columbia Pictures, which they bought. And I learned actually that all these studios now they trade off spaces. So I was able to walk by the like, they have like the Clark Gable building, and then the Myrna Loy building, and then there's so much old Hollywood there, and just being inside. So one more detail, so because you guys will love this. So I got to stand inside the largest sound stage in all of North America, 40,000 square feet. And it's where where Wizard of Oz was filmed.
Okay.
Right. Wow. So you had the yellow brick road right there. And then he's like, oh, and Emerald City, that was in the soundstage next door. So it's like serious Hollywood history. And just standing on that ground, I don't know about you guys, but it was a sacred place. I was like, oh my God, here I am, where all the magic has happened for so many years. So I was just totally geeked out the whole time, I have to say. It was awesome being out there. Yeah.
Sounds amazing. Like as I was telling you, I was in Palm Springs, but I have not really been to LA as an adult. So I need to go and take all of those studio tours.
Yeah.
Really it's pretty amazing.
Really, really cool. Really cool. And of course, getting to share my book and meeting lots of people in LA was awesome. loved it, but that's like, you can't get the studio tour anywhere else. So
Yeah. Have you always been like a big old Hollywood fan, and that's why it was part of your latest book?
I've always been a Hollywood fan for sure, like mesmerized by the movies. Having a book adapted to screen is kind of like the ultimate dream. There's just nothing more totally immersive to me than a movie, because you get the visuals and the dialogue and the music and the whole thing, which is amazing. So that always, yeah, so that's always been a real interest of mine for sure.
Yeah, with the mentions in your book of Judy Garland and me being like, Minnesota Judy Garland, because she was born here.
There you go, Minnesota girl. I forgot that.
Yes. So another question is, so you have been involved with an organization called Grub Street. Can you tell us more about it and how you got involved with their programs?
Absolutely. So Grub Street is the largest creative writing organization in the country that's, not accredited like a university, but actually is offering MFA level programs now. So Grub Street offers writing craft workshops, short classes, longer classes for every genre, every level of ability, from beginner to advanced writer, and also even helps writers learn how to break into the market and the whole business side.
Awesome.
So headquartered in Boston, but now because of COVID, everything's gone on Zoom. So that's never going to go away. So we still have in-person classes, but we'll always have Zoom classes. So anyone who's interested, grubstreet.org, check it out. And I got involved when I was writing my very first novel. I just didn't, as I said, this was a second career. And even though I majored in English and had always wanted to be a writer, I realized that I really needed help and guidance. And so signed up for this class called Novel in Progress. And there were 10 other writers. We were all starting our novels at the same time. And we had a wonderful teacher who sort of guided us through what it takes to write a novel. And we would read our pages to each other and give each other feedback. And we became a really tight group that stayed together for a long time, writing our novels together. And 2 of those women are actually still in my writing group to this day. I mean, that was like 12 years ago or something. And so I was like, so I've been a student for life. And then I very quickly got involved and also, ended up being on the board there, so I could help them with growth and strategy and that sort of thing. So it's been, I always say they were my creative lifeline, and there's no way that I could have successfully transitioned from business to writing without the help and support of both the classes and then the community that's there, which is incredibly supportive and wonderful. So I can't say enough about it.
That's really cool. Especially, I feel like some of the advice we've gotten from different authors we've chatted with has been like, find writing partners or writing groups or critique partners or things like that. And so to automatically come away from that experience having that kind of group, that's awesome.
Yeah. And it's really hard because if you're sitting by yourself, you're like, that's great advice, but how the heck do I go about finding these people? So, getting in a class, and then you get to know people and you recognize whose feedback really works for you or whose writing you're learning a lot from, and then being able to reach out to those people and say, hey, I'd like to continue working with you. Would you be interested? Gives you that ability to do that. Otherwise, it's like, what are you going to do? Stand on the street and be like, hi, writer looking for writing part. It's really hard otherwise, I think, and intimidating otherwise.
Yeah, some authors were like, I just started following people on Twitter and like talking to them on there. And as I was lamenting to you about Twitter being a time suck for me, I have not really done that, but
yeah. And that works for some people, but for me, it's more like, that feels really intimidating. I'd rather kind of be in in a situation where we're all sharing our work, we're all on the same footing. And then like any classroom, then you make friends with people who you think you can, relate to, or who can relate to your work, really, more importantly.
When I first saw that you worked with Grub Street, I thought it was the New York Magazine food blog Grub Street.
I know we have that problem a lot. Unfortunately,
very cool too.
I know it's unfortunate we have the same name, but
do you want to go, Megan, with the
All right,
next?
so tell us about how you ended up having Madigan Linane write original songs for your book.
I love your questions. You guys have done your homework. So for those who haven't read the book, there's a whole 1970s timeline in my book, which the character in that timeline, the main character in that timeline, is an aspiring Broadway star. And so music's really important because she's trying out for and is working on a musical, a fictional musical in the book. And her love interest is a singer-songwriter. And so there's a song that's really important in his world. And so I had this idea last summer that it would be really awesome, I thought, if I could find an artist, a musician who had an interest in taking a couple of songs in the book and making them real. And so really good friends of mine introduced me to this fabulous young woman named Madigan Linane, who's a Berklee College of Music student. She's like a junior in college, right? To be clear. I mean, Berklee is like one of the best music programs in the country, if not the best. And they knew her because she has sung at their wine bar on and off, and introduced me to her. And she read the book and loved it. And I said, hey, do you want to collaborate and make these two songs? One's called Stay With Me and one is called Resurrection, real songs. So she had nothing but the song titles and she had the plot of the book, a tiny bit of plot from this musical that Stay With Me is in. And she wrote the music and the lyrics and professionally recorded them and dropped the songs the same day as the book came out. So they're now streaming on Spotify and Apple Music and wherever you get your music. And I love them. And it was just amazing to have an artist in a different medium.
Yeah.
Right. Cause I'm just writing, like translate the story that I put in the world and then create this music out of it. It's been one of my favorite things actually of the publishing process of this particular novel. It's pretty special.
Yeah, like you see books have like recipes in it. So like seeing another one with like actual music, that's pretty neat.
Right?
Yeah.
I know, it's awesome. And I don't know if you guys have had a chance to listen to the songs yet, but she's pretty special. It's pretty wonderful. And I wish it's not, unfortunately, it's not printed in the book that these songs exist, but on my author website, you can have links to the songs so people will be able to find them. So I really hope a lot of people discover these songs because they're really wonderful.
Yeah, we will definitely post some links with when this uploads fully into the app.
Oh, wonderful. That's great. Thank you. And they're going to be on the audiobook too, which is very cool. It hasn't the audiobook got a little delayed, so it's not coming out till June, but they're putting clips of both songs in the audiobook, which is also really fun. You don't get that very often in an audiobook. So yeah.
Yeah, I was a little behind, so I was just finishing the book this weekend. So I was like, I need to wait to listen to these songs until I'm like at that part of the book.
Yeah, right? Awesome.
And what's so funny is like I think I was explaining to my dad about he was watching the show Daisy Jones and the Six. And was like, wait, like, did the author write these songs? And I was like, I mean, no, I don't think so. Like, I think they worked with musicians to get these songs off the ground. So it's fun to hear the process for it.
Yeah, complete. I think Taylor Jenkins Reid had, for Honeycomb anyway, there some of the lyrics were in the book because that was sort of part of the story of their struggle. But they had a songwriter who they wrote like 27 songs, I think, or something insane for that series. It's really spectacular. Yeah.
So besides Grub Street helping you along, was it difficult for you to transition from being an entrepreneur to a writer? Like, I know I personally struggle with time management, things like that. Were there things that, like, going from a regular job to writing, was that difficult for you?
Oh my God. It was really difficult in so many ways because I didn't know what I was doing. I was used to having it being part of a team.
Mm-hmm.
And I was by myself other than my Grub Street friends and having that community. And also, I guess it depends what career you're in, but previously my experience was you put in a lot of hard work, and the amount of work you put in and getting better at something, it kind of immediately shows results.
Mm-hmm.
And writing is, in my experience anyway, not it doesn't go like that. Like there's a lot of rejection. It takes a ton of luck. I count myself as very lucky having 3 books out there in the world. There's so many beautiful books that never get published. And that's not to dissuade anybody from trying. It's just to say that it's a little bit more like feeling like you're just a tiny little needle in a big haystack.
Mm-hmm.
And God, I hope it hits someone on the right day. And so that I'm still trying to get used to that, to be honest. It's kind of a crazy winding road in publishing, unlike anything I've ever experienced in the business world. So I really count on the support of my writing friends, some of whom have done this many more times before me, and some who still are waiting for their first book to be published, and to compare stories and notes and what works and what doesn't, and to remind each other that in the end, and I tell myself this every day, you really have to be in it for the process of making the art.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of the wonder of discovering stories in yourself and putting them on the page, and that the opportunity to connect with even one reader is really special. And so, but that's like my mantra. I keep telling myself this every day because it's everyone wants to be in the New York Times bestseller list, right? But or maybe that's held up as somehow the ultimate, but
Mm-hmm.
I think the ultimate is having your book really well loved by somebody. And so I just keep trying to remind myself of that. And that's a really different experience than being in business,
Mm-hmm.
this world. So it's hugely different.
And is it different from, like, the business side? I feel like you want feedback and, like, how to change stuff, whereas I should say, from my personal experience, sometimes with your creative process, you don't necessarily want the feedback of how to change things, or like not that you don't want to go, I don't know where I'm going with this, sorry. Like, not that you don't want to make yourself better, but just that it's like, it's a little different than business.
Well, no, it's an interesting thought, because I know I feel like I know where you're going with this. So I rely very much on feedback from people who I want it from,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I rely really heavily on both writing friends, but also friends of mine who are not writers, who are voracious readers. So I go to and say, please give me feedback on this manuscript. And my manuscripts have improved 1,000% because of that feedback. It's really hard, though. It is really hard when you get unsolicited feedback, and someone says, like, I liked your last book better. And you're like,
all right,
what am I supposed to do? What is the proper response to that? Exactly. Right. So it is really hard. I mean, it's like it's very scary putting art out there in the world. It really is. You're just handing it out there, and you never know what the response is going to be. So I get what you where you
Yeah,
were.
I think I was leaning more towards like, they say like don't read the comments or like maybe
Yeah,
don't read reviews, at least
yeah.
from
It's so
readers, because it can
hard
be.
for me not to. In fact, I was reading reviews this morning, I have to admit. Because I really want to know, and I know
Mhm.
I'm going to learn from it. And so the trick is to try not to take it personally when someone, if someone doesn't love it, because there are lots of books that I'm sure we all read books, right? And the three of us might have very different impressions of the same book.
Mhm.
And that's okay, right? The same painting is not for everybody. That's for sure. So that's why I keep trying to remind myself, like, it's okay if someone doesn't find this to be their favorite book ever. So yeah, but it takes a little training and reminding myself all the time.
Yes.
Yeah, so speaking of having a book published, did you
Yeah.
do anything fun to celebrate the release of The Hidden Life of Aster Kelly?
Did I take time to celebrate it?
Yeah, did you do anything fun?
Well, so yes, so my launch party was at Grub Street. So Grub Street has this fabulous new headquarters in Boston, which is on the waterfront. Porter Square Books is in
Ooh.
the space. Same Porter Square Books from Cambridge, but they have a second location. We have a cafe. And we have Boston's only stage that's devoted to the written word. So I was able to introduce my book to like this fabulous crowd came. I was interviewed by Rachel Barenbaum. I don't know if you know her. She's a wonderful author. Madigan Linane came and performed the songs, and we had a party, which was just super, super fun to be able to mark the occasion um, and have lots of friends there and sign a bunch of books. And yeah, it was a really special night, really fun.
That's so fun. Next time in Boston, I need to go check that out.
You really have to. It's the most beautiful space. It's stunning.
I originally yesterday had the thought of that I needed to be drinking a glass of champagne during this chat.
Right?
From
Shouldn't
all
we all be drinking champagne?
yeah, but I forgot until right now.
That's funny. I had a follow-up party more locally because I live south of Boston 2 nights later. And the theme drink was the Aster Kelly champagne cocktail. So you were thinking in the right vein.
Yeah, let's jump into some book questions. So, can you tell us a little bit more about the plot of The Hidden Life of Aster Kelly and any inspiration that you had for it?
Of course. So, Aster Kelly, when the book opens, is 1948 in Los Angeles, and Aster Kelly shows up on Wilshire Boulevard at the door of Fernando's boutique, really hoping that she might gain an apprenticeship with him because her dream is to become a fashion designer, which is a pretty bold dream for a woman in 1948. Like most industries, totally male dominated, very few women on the design side of fashion. And she's traveled across the country because of an award from New York in hopes of gaining an internship, and he's her last chance. And they become very fast friends and rely on each other a lot because they both get romantically entangled with high profile men in Hollywood. And so this Aster Kelly, basically the plot takes a turn when Aster Kelly makes a split-second decision essentially to help protect herself and the people around her in LA, in this place that she loves. But it ends up kind of unleashing a lifelong set of secrets that she needs to keep. And the second timeline, which I mentioned previously, which takes place in 1970s New York, focuses on her daughter, the aspiring Broadway star, who makes a rash decision of her own for what she feels like are good reasons. And then sort of sets up the unwinding of a lot of these secrets that kind of blindside them both. And so I would say it's a mother-daughter story for sure. And what happens when, you know, things come to light that maybe upend your, or make you question your relationship and everything you thought that you knew. It's a story about artists for sure, from fashion designers to actors to singers, sculptors. Like, how do you find your place in the artistic world? And then at the heart of it, really, to me, about chosen family. So, you know, these relationships that we can form that maybe don't carry the typical moniker that we consider being, you know, an important relationship. So let's say husband and wife as an example, but are as important, like these people who become your family, and how fundamental that is to who a person really becomes. So that's kind of a long-winded explanation, but so there's a lot of layers, I think, for what's going on for these characters in this book. My inspiration, sorry, the second part of your question. Because we should say, it's not a spoiler, it happens in chapter 1 that Aster Kelly shows up wanting to be a fashion designer, but Fernando, the designer, outs her pretty quickly. He can tell pretty quickly that she's actually a runway model. And it's the industry she's been trying to run from in New York, because she's tired of being judged by her looks. She's tired of being a starving model, but he needs her to be a model. She needs him to teach her fashion design. And so it's important, you know, that Aster Kelly's a runway model, because my inspiration is my own mother, who was a runway model in Hollywood in the 40s, who also became entangled with pretty high profile people in Hollywood, but she refused to tell me about that time in her life. She really wouldn't talk to any of her 5 children about that time in her life. And so I was always really curious about what might have happened while she was a Hollywood model that would leave her so burdened by secrets. And so I basically made up a story to fill in those blanks for myself.
And what a story it is.
Thank you.
Have you ever had any background in like theater stuff for Lissy's points of view?
So I did a lot of theater when I was a kid. Absolutely loved the theater. I could never sing though. So, you know, once you get to a certain age, it's like, can't sing, you don't get the big parts. But I also adored Broadway. So I grew up in New Jersey, only like 30 miles west of New York City. So the big event for me every year was the opportunity to go in and see a Broadway show. And they just had the biggest impact on me. I mean, the shows were like total perfection. But I was also really impacted by the fact that, so now I'm going to date myself, but we're talking about like mid 70s to late 70s. Like Times Square, Broadway was a really scary place at that time. So the juxtaposition of literally the danger out on the streets and this like magical world going on in the theater was fascinating to me. And so I really enjoyed placing a character in that who's dying to be in this, you know, perfectly choreographed world. But how hard that is to, first of all, at any time period, to make it on Broadway, and then also to be in New York during that time, which was really, really gritty and mirrors in many ways what Aster Kelly comes to discover, right? We always think about 1940s Hollywood. It was the golden age of Hollywood, so it's all glitter and glamour. But that industry has a very dark underbelly to it also. And so in many ways, Aster and Lissy have mirror experiences as young women, as they sort of navigate the world that they're put into.
What type of research did you do to bring these characters to life?
So for the 40s part, one thing that was really helpful is I read Lauren Bacall's memoir, which is full of fantastic details about what it was like to be a contract actor in Hollywood at that time. And by that, I mean the studios worked very differently back then.
Mhm.
They hired a set of actors. You were under contract for that studio. They told you what movies to be in. You were expected to churn out 6, 7 movies in a year. And also she was, she had a pretty intense experience being involved with Humphrey Bogart. And so all of that behind the scenes stuff was really helpful. I also rely a lot on vintage magazines in my research. So being able to get my hands on, old Life magazines and Look magazines and just both the pictures and the articles and the advertisements just put you right into what that culture was like. So those are 2 things that were really helpful. And then for 1970s Broadway, there's some really great documentaries about musicals made in the 70s that take you right back to footage of, rehearsals during that time period, talking to the actors who were trying out for certain shows and then who were in certain shows and what the whole experience was like. And I'm really visual. So, you put those together, kind of the vintage magazines and the documentaries, because I need to really see where my characters are before I can write the scene, I feel like. So I tend to lean towards materials, or even, Lauren Bacall's memoir was one thing, but I need to supplement that with materials that really give me the visuals of the time and place that I'm writing about. So things like that were really helpful.
Yeah, I'm like a really big visual learner, so like I would need visuals as well. So like looking in the magazines or like stuff like that is pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And to see even like the clothing that women were wearing,
Yeah.
it's one thing to hear it described, but sometimes there's a vocabulary that, doesn't mean anything to you or wouldn't to me. And so then to see the picture, it's like, oh, okay. Now I get what that looks like. So it's really helpful.
Well, especially for how kind of in depth you go into like Lissy's like auditioning processes and like Bay's dancing auditions for shows and stuff. I was like, this is in depth.
Yeah. I'm glad that you felt that way, because there's always a challenge to bring in just enough detail that it brings you there, but not so much detail that you're like, okay, enough already. Can we get on with what the character's doing? And so trying to find the points of impact where my goal always, because I find this as a reader, is I'm really interested when an author shares a little tidbit that I didn't know before about a certain place or industry or whatever. So to be able to drop that in a way that gives the reader confidence, but means something to the story. And then, and then you can kind of move on to dialogue and action and all that good stuff.
Well, where's my question? All right, here we go. So there are many different types of love and love stories in this book. Can you tell us a little bit more about them and whether it was like a conscious choice or whether it was something that evolved as you got to know your characters?
Yeah. So one of the relationships I'm sure that's top of mind for you is Fernando, the aforementioned designer who Aster goes to work for, falls deeply in love with Christopher Page, who is the up and coming megastar for Galaxy Studios, which is my fictional Hollywood studio. So, again, we're talking late 1940s. So the studios 100%, if there was a gay actor, that was just a non-starter from the studio point of view, and actually from our country's point of view. If an actor was discovered to be gay, that's it. People would no longer go see those movies. And so the industry and Hollywood was hyper vigilant about either A, not hiring gay actors in the first place, or if they were already finding some success, to make sure they did everything they could to hide that from the world. And so Aster gets a front row seat to this really beautiful romance, this true love story that needs to be hidden from the world. And that was from the get-go, to me, always going to be a center point of this story. I mentioned chosen family in the beginning, and the friendship between Aster and Fernando and Christopher, and how they help each other in unconventional and unexpected but really loving ways. To me, it was a story that I just really wanted to tell. So, that was sort of the genesis of the whole thing for me. And I think part of that, interestingly, I was reflecting on this, came from, my mother is a runway model. I grew up in a pretty conservative household. And even though my mother wouldn't talk about her time in Hollywood, she was also a model in New York before and after her time in Hollywood. And she would talk very openly to me about the designers who, this sounds very cliche, but most of the men she worked with in fashion were gay. And she would speak so lovingly of them and how they treated her and how they would give her scrap materials because she couldn't afford nice clothes like what she was modeling. And she would take home the scrap materials and make her own clothes. And I heard this tenderness in her voice about some of these designers who she got to know that I think always stuck with me, that even in a very conservative household, I always grew up with this just sense that, like, right, like any other romance, okay, so they're gay, like, fine. And so, even again, to date myself, growing up in the 70s, like, that's not something that was talked about. And I feel really fortunate that for me, it was just like any other romance. Like, what's the difference? Which I believe strongly. And so having the opportunity to include it in a way that wasn't just not just thrown in there, it's significant to the plot of the whole book and who Aster becomes, I think was something that I was motivated to do from the get-go.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful, and we try not to do spoilers, and tragic love story.
Yeah, right. I mean, there are ups and downs like any good love story, right? It's wonderful and sad and wonderful.
Yes. And then just even that part, and then just the relationships that Aster seems to find herself in and Lissy seems to find herself in is just very interesting as well.
Yeah. The other thing I think that runs through all my books are, strong women who are determined to follow their passions and find their place in the world. And often they're swimming upstream or against, the norm. But what I like about strong women, or strong characters in general, are people who are willing to make decisions. So I mentioned in the beginning that both these characters at some level make rash decisions, but at least they're their own decisions. So they have unintended consequences, right? So we have these, these secrets and things that need to be hidden. But it's not because there's like some big bad villain out there who did something terrible to somebody or whatever. It's these women who've made choices for really good reasons, and then sometimes it doesn't work out the way you think it's going to work out, or there are things that happen, unintended consequences of your own decisions, which to me is when it gets really interesting, because you can't blame anybody per se. You made the choice, but now you have to deal with the fallout from those choices. And what do you do to either, own up to it, unwind it, hide it? I mean, that to me is kind of some of the most interesting questions about the human condition, which in the end is kind of all stories are about.
Yeah, especially both of them finding themselves in these different situations that it's like, whoa, like mother, like daughter, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
So were there any characters that like you most identified with while you were writing the story?
Yeah, so I got Fernando's like my fave. I have to say, I love him from beginning to end. Maybe that's different than who I identify with. I mean, I identify with Aster and Lissy both because of their artistic journeys. So we talked about this in the beginning. This, you know, what does it take to put yourself out there in an artistic field? How do you know if you have the talent, if you're the one who should be doing it? Should you, you know, there's a moment in the beginning of when you first meet Lissy where she describes her artistic journey as she's in a maze, but she doesn't know where in the maze she is. Like maybe she's one turn from being at the end and yay, and or maybe she's 300 turns and you just don't know that. So I very much relate to that. So there's definitely a lot of me in both of them. I mean, Lissy's super ambitious. Not everyone will relate to Lissy. You know, she's not always likable all the time, I think. But you know, we're not all always likable, especially as women when we have serious ambition. And then I relate to Aster's. I think Aster is constantly worried about everyone around her. Mm-hmm. It's a real difference between Aster and Lissy. She makes a lot of decisions she makes because she wants the people around her to be okay. And I really relate to that desire. And so I think that's a beautiful thing. But sometimes, you know, there are consequences. There can be consequences when that's how you make decisions in your life. So I relate to that a lot.
We do have a question from Jessica who says, are there any specific strong women who influence what strong women means to you? You mentioned your mother. Is there anyone else?
Oh my gosh, that's a really good question. And that's such a hard, I feel like I'm influenced by all the strong women out there, and especially ones who I think are maligned a lot. You know, you look at someone like it's going to sound strange with a like fashion Hollywood oriented, but you know, like a Hillary Clinton, like people like she's bold. She gets out there. She's doing something for the good of the world. And all people can talk about is like, do her stockings match her, you know, her skirt. And it's so freaking maddening. Or I look at people like, you know, in the professional world, there are women like Lady Gaga or Madonna or Jennifer Lopez, who I think are just spectacular businesswomen and artists, and, you know, working so hard to get stories out there and to build a career. And it's really hard, you know, they get treated a lot as there's some, obviously they're respected in many quarters and are hugely successful. And then they're also just like fodder for the press a lot. And every time they do something that's perceived as a misstep, you know, people just can't wait to gobble that up. And so I think watching people, and God, there's so many. I mean, yeah, like I could go on and on, from Michelle Obama to Oprah to like, it's just watching women try to navigate I think the sort of unfair and it's a reality requirement to be feminine and likable and, you know, and successful and impeccable at everything you do, and somehow try and walk that tightrope is it's really tough, and it's really extraordinary when you see people still getting out there and trying to do it. So I'm inspired by all those sorts of women and gazillions more whose names, you know, we'll never know from a fame perspective.
Yeah, especially when it's like, then there's like men who just show up and they're just like blobs and do whatever. And
right. And they're like the greatest thing since sliced bread. And you're like, really? Oh my God.
Yeah. It's a whole other conversation I could go.
Whole other conversation.
But as we see behind you, so this book has an amazing cover. Can you tell us anything about the design process that you had any say in, or?
Yeah, so my publisher is Pegasus Books. That's a wonderful publisher out of New York City, and they just put out beautiful books inside and outside. And this book was done by a company called Face Out Studios that Pegasus Books chose. And I did have the opportunity to offer what I would call a visual brief. So I pulled pictures of things that I thought might work, that atmospherically felt right to me for the book. Also things that I didn't want on the book cover. But to be honest, I was a little bit all over the place because there were a million ways that we could have gone with the cover. And they somehow took about 90% of what I offered as a maybes and managed to put it all together in one cover. And so I'm sure there was a ton of back and forth between my editor and Face Out Studios before I saw it. But I have to tell you, the first version I saw, and they always ask for feedback, I had like 2 tiny little comments. I was like, that's it. It's awesome. So I feel really blessed to have that kind of.
There's my cat, Buddy.
What's the cat's name?
His name is Buddy.
Buddy. Hi,
Yeah.
Buddy. That's awesome.
Now he's running away. Otherwise, I would show you.
Now he's
He's a
running
goofy
away.
cat.
Camera shy. But we all know how important covers are. So I just feel so lucky to have that team behind this book. It's really wonderful, I think.
Yes, just like the juxtaposition of the colors and Aster and the font. It's perfect.
Right. Exactly. It's awesome. Love it.
So what do you hope that readers take away from The Hidden Life of Aster Kelly?
It's a very good question. So I think in the end, maybe this sounds very cliche, I don't know, but all that really matters is relationships. And I think the ability to communicate through difficult times. So all of these characters face difficulties in vastly different ways. And there's a lot of tension and conflict, and loss of trust or surprises that sideswipe people. And to be able to just sort of sit down and talk about what matters and why these relationships matter, and not let the rest of the world get in the way of these relationships, I think is in the end, for me, kind of what the book is about.
It's beautiful. Yes. I feel like that's definitely what I took away from it.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Yeah.
So we are a little curious. Are you working on anything currently? And can you maybe tell us something about any new projects?
So it's a little too early for me to talk about my next thing, but it's something I've been percolating on for a long time. And a challenging topic, I think, that I've been avoiding for a while.
All right.
Here's your teaser. So I'm hoping I find a way to pull it off because I think it's an important story. But once I get on the sort of other side of promotion, then I'm gonna start really trying to get it more firmly on the page. That's all I can say right now.
I get it. I think we always like to ask that question, but it's always slightly risky because it's like, obviously you're promoting this book right now and that's your main focus.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I was further along, to be honest, and I could give you my elevator pitch on what it is exactly, but I'm still ruminating. So yeah.
Well, we'll just keep our eyes peeled for any.
Yes, good. I hope you will.
Any updates. One thing we also always like to ask is, can readers get signed copies of your books anywhere?
That's a really good question. I So I don't currently have that set up, but I have, a couple indie bookstores who I adore. And so if you have readers who are interested and they want to, tell you in the comments, then I will check with one or more of those bookstores and absolutely make a way for them to get signed copies, because I love that. I just don't want to promise anything I can't deliver, but I'm sure they would be delighted to handle that.
We definitely have readers who'd be interested. So yeah, if you want to contact whoever, and then when I touch base with Stephanie, I can get that information out to.
Okay, that sounds great. I mean, Buttonwood Books in Cohasset, and Porter Square Books in Boston would be the two sources for sure. So in case anyone wants to write that down and send in a request, and then I will definitely talk to them and make sure that they can make that happen.
Cool. Perfect.
I'd love it.
We have at least a few readers who really love getting signed copies. So
awesome. I love that. And I have this beautiful little pink palm tree stamp that I always put on the book when I sign, because otherwise it just looks like I'm scribbling on the inside. So then it's for real when you get the stamp.
All right, I'm making a note right now for myself when I email Stephanie.
Awesome.
We also like to ask if you could share one thing with aspiring writers, what would it be?
A piece of advice for aspiring writers? Yeah. So keep writing. Don't give up on yourself. It's a long process, and there's so many peaks and valleys to it. There are days when I write something and I think, oh my God, this is great. And then 3 days later, I'll read it and be like, oh my God, no one is ever going to have any interest in this. And that's totally natural and completely normal. And I'm a real believer that if there's a story that's important enough to you to write, it's going to be important to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So keep writing it and get input from anyone who's willing to give you input and put it out there. The other thing I will say is that, and I said it a little bit in the beginning, but rejection is part of the process. It just is. So when you send out your first query letter or you send out something on submission and it gets rejected, don't take that as oh, I knew it. It's no good. And I say this all the time, every rejection means you're that much closer to an acceptance, because there are very few people who don't get rejected. And so if you just assume that you need, 99 rejections to get to the yes, let's just say, well, great, get out there and get those rejections coming. And then you're that much closer to a yes. And I'm not just saying that, I really believe it. My novel, Leaving Coy's Hill, the one before this that ended up being picked up by the New York Times and won honors in fiction for the Massachusetts Book Award. There were a ton of rejections. I didn't think that book was going to be published. And then Pegasus Books picked it up. And so this is just the way the industry works. So don't take it personally. Keep writing. Don't give up.
It's always interesting hearing all the different advice that all the authors give when we ask that question. It's always something different, I find.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If we had another hour, I'd have other things to say. But for me, keeping up the confidence in wanting to keep going it's a constant struggle. It still is, even though I've had a few books published now, every new project is terrifying all over again. So it's just kind of the nature of the beast, and you're not alone if you feel that, way.
Yes, and definitely another reason to look out for other writer friends who you can talk to about all of your experiences.
Exactly. And we count on each other to, lift each other up and show up when another author's launching something or another artist is putting themselves out there. I'm a believer in good karma too. It's just let's keep good art let's keep art coming out in the world. And that takes all of us, a huge community of people, to keep cheering each other on, to get it out there.
Well, thank you so much, Katherine, for joining us. We love talking about the book. We'll watch out for your next book.
Awesome. Thank you so
Have
much
you
for
back.
having me. It's a great conversation.
And thank you, members of the Nest, for being here. Our next author chat is going to happen on Sunday, April 23rd at 8 p.m. Eastern, and it will be with Gabrielle Savit, who is the author of Come See the Fair. All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.